The Singapore summit is in the books, but what exactly did US President Donald Trump and North Korean leader Kim Jong-un manage to achieve? I'm Femi Oke.
I'm Malika Bilal. Today we look at what their highly anticipated meeting means for diplomacy, as well as what it means for Koreans living on the peninsula and in the diaspora.
Right now, you're in the stream. We are live on YouTube, so leave your questions in the chat and we will do our best to get them into today's show.
Hello, my name is Chen Jan, and I'm a political scientist based in Copenhagen, and you are on the stream.
President Donald Trump and North Korean leader Kim Jong-un haven't always had the best relationship. Trump has previously referred to Kim as Little Rocket Man, and Kim in turn has called Trump a dotard who's unfit to serve in the White House. But that tension seemingly vanished when the two controversial heads of state met in Singapore on Tuesday.
Trump, the first sitting U.S. president to meet with North Korean leaders, said the meeting was fantastic and made a lot of progress. And while the joint statement signed by both men notes their intent to build a, quote, lasting and stable peace regime, some activists questioned whether the issue of human rights abuses in the so-called Hermit Kingdom were high enough on the agenda.
Joining us now to talk about what's been a whirlwind day of diplomacy in Singapore, Kimberly Harkett is Al Jazeera's White House correspondent. Here on our set, we have Christian Ahn, the founder of the Women Cross the DMZ, or Demilitarized Zone. That organization represents a movement of women mobilizing to end the Korean War. In New York, Yeonmi Park is a human rights activist and author. She fled North Korea at the age of 13. And in Ulaanbaatar, Mongolia, Jenny Town is managing editor for 38 North. That's an online news portal covering the Korean peninsula. Hello, everybody. It's good to have you here. Yeonmi, when you were watching the images coming out of this Singapore summit, as somebody who was born in North Korea, who escaped from North Korea, what were you thinking?
It was so surreal to me how I don't know how Kim Jong-un was not get arrested, that he is a criminal, he's a murderer. He denies that there's a human rights violation, but we all know that Kim Jong-un killed his own uncle. He executed his own uncle. He poisoned his half-brother. And how this man puts people in the concentration camp. In the name of diplomacy, we accept him as a leader of a country. He is not a leader of North Korea. He is not our leader. And that's why I don't know what the world I'm living in and what are we standing for in this country when we say we believe in justice, when we believe in human rights. Almost it's like hypocrites, these politicians say all these nice cliche things. They don't even know what freedom means. They don't even know what injustice looks like. And while they are this all photoshots with this dictator, and I don't know, how should I think of this? How can I explain this to my 3-month-old son? What kind of world we are facing and how to make a sense out of this situation even.
So it didn't make sense to you and me. Christine, I was looking at your Twitter feed and you share this with the world. I just woke up to this. I'm awake or dreaming? Unpack that thought for us. What were you thinking?
I just think it was surreal to see the statement that was agreed by both Trump and Kim. I mean, this is a 67-year conflict. This is a 7-decade war that was a brutal war that preceded by division and colonial occupation by Japan. So this is a real long history of two countries being at war, of being adversaries, and, you know, really hostile relationship. And you have, I mean, the image of them shaking hands to see the flags of the U.S. and the DPRK side by side. I mean, you know, as somebody that has been working for this peace process, it's an extraordinary feat.
Oh, Christina, I'm glad that you mentioned the flags. You weren't the only one who found that surreal. This is Pavrita on Twitter who says, just another photo op. And although I'm not American, it's so jarring to me to see the North Korean flag alongside the U.S. Symbolic mostly, but jarring. I want to just flip through a couple of other comments on how surreal this was to other people. And Kimberly, I'll pass these off to you. Wasani on Twitter says, the first time I heard Kim's voice, I believe this was a historic talk, a brilliant move for the world peace. And he's really just noting you don't actually hear the North Korean leader in Western media. Another person watching live on YouTube says, after finding out that no other American president has ever met with a North Korean leader, Trump's doing pretty well, I think. So Kimberly, talk to us about the feeling of this being so surreal to so many people.
Well, certainly it was surreal even last evening, about 24 hours ago here in Singapore, when there was a bit of a fascination with Kim Jong-un as his motorcade first arrived in Singapore, and then when he reemerged from his hotel to go around the city, seeing some of the sights, even snapping a selfie with a local government official, a high-profile government official. Many people were having that same feeling, given the fact that this is a relatively reclusive leader. We rarely see him unless it is in some sort of state-controlled type setting, highly choreographed. But in many ways, this whole moment today was highly choreographed by the U.S. president. So there is sort of a mixed reaction to what is being seen. Kim Jong-un himself probably said it best when the White House press corps was following them at the Capella Hotel at Sentosa Island, just about 5 kilometers from where I'm standing right now. He likened it to something from a science fiction film. And certainly I think that many are feeling that, given the fact that the optics of these two men side by side is so unbelievable, it's hard to believe it's really happening.
I want to share a moment that really stood out to me. I was intrigued to see what would happen in the press conference a little bit later after the summit. This is President Donald Trump talking to the awaiting press. And I was really curious, what would the first question be? Have a listen to the first question and his answer.
The man you met today, Kim Jong-un, as you know, has killed family members, has starved his own people, is responsible for the death of Otto Warmbier. Why are you so comfortable calling him very talented?
Well, he is very talented. Anybody that takes over a situation like he did at 26 years of age and is able to run it and run it tough. I don't say he was nice, or I don't say anything about it. He ran it. Very few people at that age, you can take 1 out of 10,000 probably couldn't do it.
Jenny, that moment stood out for me. It almost sounded like admiration for the leader of North Korea. It's an unusual take, certainly from the US. Yeah. That stood out for me. What stood out for you?
Well, I tend to agree with that. I think the whole thing was very surreal. It was odd in some ways that, that the people were so fascinated with Kim Jong-un to the point that, there was mobs of people trying to get pictures of him. There's the whole selfie thing, the whole Trump's comments about him later. There was no protests about him. It did feel, it felt weird. And it felt weird because this isn't the way that we're supposed to react to dictators. This isn't the way that we've ever looked at North Korea before. And I understand on some level there is a reason to move the conversation forward and to build this relationship because he is the leader of North Korea. And if we are going to get anywhere in a non-confrontational, non-conflict way, we do need to have that relationship. But the way that it was handled was so overboard, and it really changed the perception, and the optics were way more overboard than they ever needed to be, and it was really just a weird day.
Well, let's be honest here. I mean, North Korea is a brutal dictatorship. And what is the goal of being engaged in this process? I think that we know that North Korea has been a national security surveillance garrison state. And so if we try to get to the end of this conflict that has been used by both actually governments on both sides of the DMZ to crack down on their people, I think that we have to look at it from a more holistic, let's widen the frame and try to get to the end of the war so that there can be improvements on human rights. And I mean, the leader, the head of the World Food Program came out of North Korea just a few weeks ago, and he said, if there is a peace agreement, that would lead to substantial improvements in the day-to-day conditions of the North Korean people. So I don't think we have a problem in the United States. This government, whether it has been Trump or Obama, never has a problem with dictatorships, whether it's in Saudi Arabia or the kind of brutal regime that's in Israel. So, let's temper it with the reality of what is always in the government's interests.
It's an interesting point. I want to pick up here on Twitter with something that goes off of the back of what you're saying. This is Jay who says, I think this is an opportunity to open dialogue concerning human rights in North Korea. The U.S., other countries and organizations like the UN should take this chance and start discussing ways they can tackle human rights violations that have been happening in North Korea. So not exactly listening to what you're saying there, but thinking that human rights need to be higher on the agenda. On the other side, though, this is Sean, who lays a little bit of caution. He says, don't forget, no one saw the Kim-Trump summit happening 8 months ago. So as denuclearization takes time, so also human rights violations talks should be cautiously introduced with a little patience. Youngmi, I'm wondering what you think about that.
So this is almost even, I don't even know how to comprehend this. How come a human life comes after nukes? I mean, nukes can wait, but the lives of people who's persecuted by Kim Jong-un right now at this very point, they cannot wait. Right now, once the defectors escape to China, because they are starving, North Korea, the Kim Jong-un has money to his own people. As Christine said, people are not starving in North Korea because they don't have food. Because this dictator using starvation as a tool to control the people. If Kim Jong-un has money to make missiles, why he cannot spend that money on the people feeding them? So legitimizing this dictator, so dialogue in the sake of dialogue. That's why we are here. North Korea has been there past 67 years, because we are counting on our politicians, whose interest only is keeping their status quo in this process. So I don't even know how Trump went in, just saying, as long as you are willing to talk about denuclearizing the country, I am going to accept how you are behaving and all your sovereignty in the country, and that is a crime. Kim Jong-un is committing the crimes against humanity, and he needs a challenge on that. The first thing, that if really North Korea showed genuine interest, that I am not saying we should not go talk to North Korea. Our agenda should be asking him, are you interested in opening the gulags? Are you interested in let the investigation go and then see how people like being treated by your regime? But that's not what you are asking. You are asking only the nukes. So if the regime there stays there, the U.S. the politics has this term policy. So Trump cannot become our president forever. So let's imagine he gets out of the office maximum 6 years later. Once he's out, what are you going to do? So North Korea said we are going to denuclearizing. We are going to take these steps, gradual steps, by the way. And once the Trump is out, we get another soft administration comes in, gonna say, all right, we are not going to challenge you. So we are going back to this peace summit again. So this is exactly what happened in 2007. In 2000, when I was 7 years old in North Korea. I thought literally South Korea, North Korea going to reunification.
Right.
The guy who led peace talk, by the way, who enriched this dictator who won the Nobel Peace Prize. That criminal won the Nobel Peace Prize, and we are here today again talk about the peace. So this is a lie that politicians want us to believe and keep their status quo. And how are you are we so innocent and how are we so delusional and believing these lies, and this is gonna do something for the people of North Korea and going to get rid of the nukes entirely.
Okay, you mean to take a pause for a moment. I want to bring in Kimberly and then Kristen, I'll go right back to you. I'm just looking at what Secretary Pompeo shared quite recently on Twitter. He is the Secretary of State for the United States. Kimberly, he says among the issues that the President of the United States and the team discussed with North Korea, human rights, religious freedom, Japanese abductees. You can hear from you and me how important that is. But where in the agenda was it? And how do we even know that that actually happened and took place?
Well, I listened to the entire hour-long press conference, so this question came up multiple times, not just the first question, but it was picked up and drilled down to a finer point by a couple of reporters, at least. It certainly was part of the discussion. Donald Trump was asked about the tens of thousands, the more than hundreds of thousands of people that are in these gulags and what this means, whether or not this photo opportunity has sort of legitimized all of that. Donald Trump said that very clearly that in his 4-hour discussion with the North Korean leader, that the issue of human rights did come up. And he did say, without getting into details, which is typical Donald Trump, that they're working on it, that this was part of the discussion, and he believes that things will start to improve and move forward. He didn't elaborate beyond that. But when it comes to the issue of human rights, when you look at it from an emotional standpoint, it's very hard to defend what happened today and the fact that there are still people locked up. But when you look at it from an intellectual standpoint, I remember the very same criticisms being leveled against President Obama when there was the decision to normalize diplomatic relations with the Cuban government after the accusations against Fidel Castro and the Castro brothers and Raul Castro. And the argument was, and there were the critics again, saying that, you know, you've legitimized this, you have brushed this or swept this under the rug. There are still people that are not being allowed freedoms, that are being denied basic human rights and all of that. And the argument was, but we are very similarly at a point of impasse after decades. Decades have not worked. We've had certainly agreements before where both sides have broken down, but that doesn't mean you stop trying, not only to achieve the goal of denuclearization is the intellectual argument, the argument of the Trump administration, but also because of the issue of human rights. But if you don't have a starting point, you can't accomplish any of those goals.
Mm-hmm. I absolutely agree. And I greatly appreciate. Oh, yeah, sure, Jenny, go for it.
Yeah, I mean, I would agree with this. The question isn't, you know, should we be talking about human rights? The question is how do we get to that discussion? And, you know, part of that is to actually have the dialogue and to actually, you know, have the relationship to be able to bring it up in a productive way. You know, the Europeans have had human rights dialogues with North Korea for a very long time because they have a relationship that they've established and so that they can address these issues. And like any negotiation, the problem is you don't start with the hardest issues first. Yeah. You know, you start with the issues that you can make progress on, you build progress over time, and you work towards the bigger issues as you go along. And realistically, you know, right now the security focus is on the nuclear weapons program, but certainly as part of a normalization of relations process, human rights will come up. And it has to be part of the dialogue as we move towards normalization. But if we start the conversation by saying you must open the gulags right now before we can even talk, again, it's a non-starter and we're not going to get anywhere and have a productive dialogue.
I absolutely agree. I just want to second what Jenny said. And, you know, the fourth point that was made in the declaration was about the U.S. servicemen remains and the retrieval of that. And, you know, I mean, there are millions of families that are held hostage by this unresolved state of war. 5,000 U.S. families that are waiting. I mean, my friend Rick Downs told me this story about how he flew into Pyongyang, and as he flew over the fields, I mean, he said that was the closest he had been to his father since he was 3 years old. And so that's just the American families and the children of U.S. servicemen that fought in the Korean War. But what about the millions of Korean families? You know, we have seen studies of defectors in South Korea who want the reunification of Korea so that they could be with their families. I have friends here in the U.S. that are defectors that see this as an important step towards them possibly ever returning back to their hometown. So, and to the point that Kimberly brought about Cuba, I think there's a great parallel here. Stephen Kinzer, who is the New York Times reporter, the former, and who's written books about U.S. regime change. And he talks about this story about when Fidel Castro and Che Guevara met for the first time in Mexico City after the overthrow of Arbenz, the Guatemalan democratically elected president in 1954. And they met for the first time, and he told, Che Guevara told Fidel what happened, and they made that agreement. And they said, if we succeed in retaking Cuba, we cannot have an open society because of the threat of being overthrown by the U.S. I mean, we know there is a history of covert and overt operations. And so, we have to understand that, I think, to push for a greater freedom and openness within North Korea. But we have to start with dialogue and, I believe, normalization of relations. And we have seen progress made on disability rights through respectful engagement with the North Korean government.
Christine, the point you made about still being at war, the war having not ended, a show that we did recently here on the stream, G.E. Lee on Twitter brings that up. He says Korea has been a divided nation for the last 70 years, and South Korea is under existential threat from nuclear North Korea. Most South Koreans hope this summit will be successful in denuclearization of North Korea and bring peace to the Korean peninsula. So it's that idea of denuclearization being something that some Koreans want to be at the top of the agenda. That's represented here in this video comment that we also got from Wolsan Lim. She's the director of the Korean Public Service and Transportation Workers Union, and this is what she had to say.
I think it's important, however, to recognize that there are some limitations in the agreement that came out of this summit. It's not very specific on what steps both sides are going to take to achieve denuclearization of the peninsula, but more broadly, a peace regime. And so it's beholden on people, workers, and the common people of South Korea and globally to put forth a vision of what peace really looks like for us. That means obviously the signing of a peace treaty. It means getting rid of not only North Korea's nuclear weapons, but also the nuclear threat from the United States. We hope that achieving denuclearization of the Korean Peninsula might be the first step towards real nuclear disarmament globally.
Jenny, what do you make of what she said?
Well, I think, there's some important points in there. And the first is that, it's not just about the threat that North Korea's nuclear weapons pose to South Korea and to the United States and to the world. But, that North Korea itself is under an existential threat. And there's a reason why they have built a nuclear arsenal over time. And it's not just prestige. But there is a self-defense deterrent component to it as well. North Korea is during the Korean War, there was talk about using nuclear weapons against North Korea to end the war. There have been, the introduction of tactical nuclear weapons to South Korea after the war, even though they have been taken out since then. But there's still always, South Korea is under the protection of the U.S. nuclear umbrella, as is Japan. And if you're North Korea, you're sitting in the middle of a nuclear neighborhood of economic and political giants, and you're the only country that technically does not have, nuclear weapons, either your own program or by proxy state. And so, there is a reason why, the peace matters, and there's a reason why, North Korea has always sort of posed the process of we have to have peace first before we can really achieve denuclearization, because they need that sort of justification to be able to change the narrative and to be able to have some confidence in sort of how they move forward without nuclear weapons if they decide to exit the program.
There was a presentation that Trump brought to Kim, and it was on an iPad. It was a little video, and it was showing what the possibilities, what the potential might be. One of them could be, just think about what you could do with your beaches. This was a comment that President Trump made in the press conference shortly afterwards. Have a look.
But that was a version of what could happen, what could take place. As an example, they have great beaches. You see that whenever they're exploding their cannons into the ocean, right? So I said, boy, look at that beach. Wouldn't that make a great condo behind? And I explained, I said, instead of doing that, you could have the best hotels in the world right there. Think of it from a real estate perspective. You have South Korea, you have China, and they own the land in the middle. How bad is that, right? It's great. But I told them, I said, you may not want to do what's there. You may want to do a smaller version of it, or, you know, and that could be. Although I tell you what, he looked at that tape, he looked at that iPad, and I'm telling you, they really enjoyed it, I believe.
That is one vision of the future. Malika?
Here is a warning from YouTube. Ralph says, how can North Korea be certain that the U.S. will keep their part of the bargain? Something that we will ponder for another show. Our thanks to all of our guests today. That's all the time we have. Be sure to follow along at aljazeera.com for updates on the Singapore summit. And of course, you can keep up with all of it at AJ Stream.